It's no secret the SEC is changing their scheduling format, and the favorite in the clubhouse right now is somewhere in the range of a 9-game conference schedule, meaning, according to the reports, there will be 3 permanent opponents for every single SEC team within the conference. Now, most coaches are in favor of this. Nick Saban, we talked about it before on this show, is not crazy about the rumored draw for Alabama. Ross Dellinger put out a report that essentially had the 3 teams that these SEC teams would be paired with. Alabama drew LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn. And Nick Saban said, hey, I'm all in favor of conference games. You guys know that I'm in favor of conference games. We need to have competitive games, but how did you guys give us LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn? How is that our draw? That is an absolute gauntlet. And from his perspective, it's fair to say, put a pause on that. Brian Kelly, Ole Miss, Alabama, and A&M are who LSU drew, rather. So how do we unpack their response to this? Because like I said, Nick Saban wasn't thrilled about it. Brian Kelly is saying, I came to the SEC to play the best. I'm here for it. Let's roll. He also said, I don't think anybody's worried about Nick Saban being ready to play. Nick Saban, everybody's going to have their take on scheduling, but Nick Saban will be ready. And I think Brian Kelly is on the money in saying that. But let's just take a pause here. Like I said, if you're Nick Saban, how much longer are you going to coach for? Is it 10 years? Is it 5 years? I think the growing sentiment is Nick Saban is probably not going to coach for an extended period of time. I think we're coming to the end of his career. For Brian Kelly, he just got to the SEC, and it feels like to me he's still in prove-it mode. He's still got a lot of his naysayers, people saying he can't recruit well. Now he's got a top 5 class. People saying he's not a fit at LSU. They go to the SEC title game in his first year. He welcomes the smoke because he feels like he still has that chip on his shoulder, and people still aren't 100% certain of what their opinion is of Brian Kelly. I got more thoughts on this. But if you haven't yet subscribed, would love to have you at the party. We have had a ton of y'all join us here in the last few months, so thank you for that. And if you haven't yet subscribed and joined the party, no time like the present. Would love to have you here. Also, make sure you're following me on Instagram and on Twitter at JDPakel to stay up with everything that we're doing here. Like I said, perspective is everything. In the next 3 years, from Nick Saban's point of view, what he's saying is fair. Why did we draw LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn? How is the SEC giving us that? From a coach's perspective, I get that. Because LSU just won a national title in 2019. Auburn, they've played for 2 national titles and won one like the last 15 or 20 years, even if they are down or coming off of a down era. And then Tennessee, the way that the SEC came up with these opponents, I'm sure there was some historic factor taken into account there, but for the most part, it was winning percentage of the last 10 years. And Tennessee was somewhere in the range of 40% win percentage. So they were in the bottom half of the SEC. Now, you and I both know, if we're thinking about this in real time, looking forward to, again, the next 3 years, Josh Heupel's got that thing rolling. Tennessee is a top 10 football team going forward. Tennessee is a sleeping giant that I think is just now starting to get woken up. So Nick Saban's saying, how did we get these 3 teams? Again, perspective is everything. If you're Nick Saban, your priorities are to win another national title and leave Alabama and the SEC in good position when you ride off into the sunset. Okay? These 3 teams for the next few years doesn't necessarily put those priorities in perfect position to get accomplished. You hear what I'm saying? Because LSU, I think they're going to be good as long as Brian Kelly's there. Same thing with Tennessee. Who knows about Auburn with Hugh Freeze? I think that's going to work. To what degree? Remains to be seen. For Brian Kelly, like I said, he's trying to prove himself. Now, he didn't draw the same draw that Nick Saban drew, if you're keeping up with me, in terms of teams that he has to play year in and year out. But for Brian Kelly, he's like, I'll take anybody and everybody. I'm ready to prove myself. So just different points in their career, and I think that's why you have different takes. Now, I've gone on this show before and said this. I think long-term, I think Nick Saban's wrong. And I will say that very few times on this show. I will not make that a theme throughout the course of what we do here on the Hard Count. But I do not believe that Nick Saban is accurate in his assessment that this is going to somehow hurt Alabama long term. First, you got to protect these rivalries. I don't know how you take away LSU and Alabama. I don't know how we take that off the table. That makes no sense to me. You got to play that game every year. How do you take away the Iron Bowl the third Saturday in October? LSU, Tennessee, Auburn are absolutely the right teams for Alabama. The reason why I'm not feeling sorry for Alabama going forward is because we don't know, without a shadow of a doubt, that all three of those teams that they have set to play are going to be competitive in the future, in the next 15, 20, 100 years, because that's what this thing is for. This scheduling isn't going to change every 4 or 5 years. Now, with conference realignment, we'll keep an eye on how this could shift. But the thought process in putting these permanent opponents together is over the next 100 years, you're going to play these teams. What happens if Brian Kelly leaves for the NFL tomorrow? What happens to LSU? What happens to Tennessee if Josh Heupel were to leave tomorrow? I think football is cyclical at the collegiate level, and I think it's very much so head coach dependent. And all three of these teams, I think, are a head coach away from being in a different standing. It's not to say they'll be better or worse or anything. I'm just saying it's a huge question mark what they look like in 10 years. Same thing for Alabama, quite frankly. Who's to say what they look like after Nick Saban leaves? You see what I'm saying here? So we're protecting the integrity of the game. We can't have it be specific to one coach or a couple seasons here or 10 seasons there. I get it. We got to take it into account. But for Alabama and Nick Saban, I don't think that they're going to be in too difficult of a position. And like Brian Kelly said with Nick Saban, he's going to be ready. Like, as much as he's telling you, hey, I don't like the way this shakes out, he's not complaining. He's objecting, but he's not saying that it's going to be too tough for Bama. Bama's going to be Bama, just to keep it a buck with you. Now, again, going back to perspective, that's Nick Saban's perspective. For Brian Kelly's perspective, I think what he's saying is on the money. And just how I said I think it's going to benefit Bama long term. Remember, the college football playoff is expanding. And what do we always talk about when it gets to November and we're talking about who's going to get in and who's going to be one of those last couple teams in with 4? When it gets to 12, we'll talk about this even more. Who did you play? Who are your quality wins, your quality losses, which is just a gross word to use, but we got to talk about it. The SEC is going to come up smelling like roses in that conversation. Because I would bet my bottom dollar, LSU, Tennessee, Auburn, Alabama, LSU, all those teams, they'll be within that top 25 range more often than not. A&M and Ole Miss, A&M's stockpiled with talent. Everyone wants to make a joke about A&M and what they did last year, but they're stocked in terms of talent, and Jimbo Fisher has shown he can win. Got a national title to prove it. Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, they're churning along. They're going to be fine when it comes to the end of the season and getting into the expanded playoff. So if I'm Brian Kelly, I'm saying, yeah, bring on all the SEC teams. Whoever we got to play, we'll play them. Because guess what? At the end of the year, if you have a 2-point loss to Alabama, if that is how you get down in your LSU, and that's your one blemish on your record, it's fine, right? It's fine. It's better than some of these teams have in terms of wins. So the resumes for these teams, as they play more conference games, this is going to help them. For Alabama and for Brian Kelly at LSU, it's going to help them. So I'm excited to watch how that plays out. The expanded playoff and the permanent opponents for the SEC, more conference games, will give them a better resume when all the dust settles on Selection Sunday. I 1,000% believe that. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.